It's funny the things you notice when your world is about to end. Not the big dramatic portents from films, but the small stupid details. The way the waiter's cufflink, a small silver knot, was slightly frayed at the seam. The ghost of a lipstick stain on my water glass, a pale pink crescent that wasn't mine. The scent of the lilies on the table, overpowering, funereal. I remember thinking, who puts lilies at a birthday dinner? It felt less like a celebration and more like a beautifully catered wake. And in a way, I suppose it was. This was my 52nd birthday dinner. 21 years of marriage to Marcus were meant to be the centerpiece of the evening, a testament to endurance. Our friends, the same circle we'd curated since our 30s, filled the private room at Canto, their laughter echoing off the dark wood panels. They were telling stories about us, sanitized anecdotes that painted a portrait of a perfect life. The time Marcus surprised me with a trip to Tuscany, the time I nursed his ego through a failed business venture, the story of our life, as told by everyone but me. I sat there smiling. The smile was a marvel of engineering, a skill I'd perfected over the last year. It didn't reach my eyes, but it was solid enough to deflect questions. Inside there was a stillness. My pulse wasn't racing. Not exactly. It was something worse. A heavy, slow beat like a drum at the bottom of a well. For a year I had known. Not everything, not the full, sordid architecture of his betrayal, but enough. I'd seen the shift in him. The phone that was suddenly angled away from me, the late-night board meetings that left no paper trail, the new cologne, a sharp citrusy scent so unlike the sandalwood he'd worn since I met him. It was the smell of a man trying to be new for someone else. Then came the finances. I had always managed our money. It was my domain, my contribution to the partnership while he was the face, the charismatic visionary. He trusted me implicitly, which, I realize now, was just another form of neglect. He never looked at the statements. He just reaped the benefits. A year ago, he started talking about tightening our belts. He'd sigh over the cost of the club membership, lament the expense of property taxes, all while a quiet, steady stream of funds bled from our joint accounts into a void I couldn't yet identify. He was building a new life and charging the construction costs to the old one. Our friends, the enablers, must have seen the cracks. A few weeks prior, my friend Sophia had called me, her voice laced with that specific brand of cautious concern that signals gossip. "I saw Marcus downtown yesterday," she'd said, "at that new jewellery store, Argento. He was with..." Well, she was very blonde. I remember the silence that followed. I didn't ask for a name. I didn't need one. I just said, "He was probably picking up my birthday gift." "Oh, of course," Sophia had replied, relieved to be let off the hook. "You know how he is. Always so thoughtful." The lie was a life raft for her, not for me. It was her chance to retreat, to say she'd done her duty without having to get her hands dirty with the truth. It was a weak, dismissive response, a pat on the head that confirmed I was utterly alone. In that quiet, I heard everything I needed to. No one was coming to save me. My salvation was my own responsibility, and now here we were. The main courses were cleared. The waiter poured champagne, the bubbles fizzing aggressively in the flutes. Marcus stood up, tapping his glass with a fork. The room fell silent. He was beaming, his face flushed with champagne and a strange, triumphant glow. He looked at me, but his eyes were like polished stones. They reflected my image but revealed nothing of his own. "To Isabella," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. 52 years, an incredible milestone. He paused, letting the sentiment hang in the air. Our friends smiled, raising their glasses. A lifetime of memories, a lifetime of partnership. And as we all know, lifetimes have chapters, beginnings, middles, and endings. The air in the room changed. The warm, celebratory hum curdled into a tense, electric silence. My hands were steady on the table, my posture perfect, but a sharp, cold pressure began to build behind my eyes. I focused on the fraying thread on the waiter's cufflink. Marcus continued, his voice taking on a tone of magnanimous sorrow. Isabella and I have built a wonderful life together. We raised a family, we built a home. But paths diverge, people change, and out of respect for the 21 years we've shared, I wanted to be honest, here, among the people who have known us best. He turned his gaze fully on me. There was no love there, no regret, only the chilling focus of an executioner. I've decided to start a new life, he announced, without you. The words didn't land like a blow. They landed like a key turning in a lock. The finality was absolute. I could feel 50 pairs of eyes darting between us, hungry for the drama, for the tears, for the screaming match they felt they were owed. Sophia's face was a mask of horrified pity. Chloe, I knew now, was the blonde from the jewellery store. A woman 17 years my junior, a guest at our last Christmas party. I didn't have to look for her. I knew she wasn't here. This part of the performance was for his audience, not for her. This was about publicly dismantling me to justify his own narrative. He wasn't done. This is difficult for everyone, I know, but I believe in honesty. And my new life, my future, it begins tomorrow with someone else, with Chloe. He said her name. He actually said her name. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it was almost breathtaking. He had planned this. The public setting was a cage, designed to make any reaction I had, any protest, any grief, look like hysteria. He was painting me as the hysterical wife, while he played the role of the sad, honest man, forced to make a difficult choice. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't give him the satisfaction. I had been preparing for a battle, but I didn't realize he would choose to launch the first strike on a field so public, so drenched in hypocrisy. And in that moment, seeing the smug pity on the faces of our friends and the triumphant cruelty in my husband's eyes, all the pain of the last year, the 1,000 cuts of his lies and betrayals crystallized not into sadness, but into a diamond-hard clarity. I held his gaze. I let the silence stretch, letting the weight of his announcement suffocate the room. Then I smiled. It was a real smile this time, small, sharp, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Congratulations on your honesty, Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly even. Then, with practiced calm, I reached into my handbag. I didn't pull out a tissue. I didn't pull out my phone to call a cab. I pulled out a single sealed jet black envelope. It was heavy, made of thick cardstock. My name was not on it. His was. I placed it gently on the white tablecloth, right beside his plate of untouched birthday cake. It sat there like a small, dark tombstone. "What's this?" he asked, his triumphant expression faltering for the first time. The confidence wavered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "Something for you to read later," I replied, keeping my voice a steady, cool murmur. "A birthday gift of sorts, to mark the beginning of your new chapter." I stood up, smoothed my dress and addressed our stunned guests. "Please, enjoy the rest of the evening. I wish you all the best." With that, I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't run. My head was held high. I could feel 50 pairs of eyes on my back, but for the first time in years they didn't matter. The heavy door swung shut behind me, cutting off the eruption of anxious murmurs. I was alone in the restaurant's opulent hallway. The emotional dam hadn't broken, it had frozen solid, and I made a silent vow. He thought he had ended our story. He had no idea I was the one who had written the last chapter. He thought he was starting a new life. He didn't know I was about to foreclose on it. I stared at my reflection in the polished marble wall, a woman I was only just beginning to recognize, and I thought to myself with a chilling stillness that felt like the birth of a new power, "Let him think I'm broken." The black envelope wasn't an impulse. It was the culmination of 365 days of methodical, painstaking work. It was the armor I had forged for myself in the dark, while Marcus slept soundly beside me, dreaming of a future he thought he was stealing. What I didn't understand when I first suspected the affair was that his betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial. He wasn't just leaving me, he was planning on leaving me with nothing. The real story, the one that mattered, began a year ago, not in our bedroom but in our bank statements. It started with a transfer, $5,000 to a holding company I didn't recognize. When I asked him about it, he waved it off. Just a small investment, darling, a friend's tech startup, high risk, high reward. He had that charming, dismissive tone he used whenever he didn't want to be questioned. For 20 years that tone had been enough, but this time something felt different. It was the casualness of the lie, the utter lack of effort. He didn't care if I believed him. That night, I didn't sleep. I went downstairs to my office, the room where I had managed our lives for 2 decades. The room was my sanctuary, filled with neat files, balanced ledgers, and the quiet hum of a well-ordered existence. That night, it felt like a crime scene. I started digging. The process was my receipts montage, a silent, grim assembly of a case against the man I had loved. I wasn't looking for sympathy. I was building a fortress. First, I found the emails. Not love letters to Chloe, nothing so careless. Marcus was smarter than that. These were emails to his financial advisor, the one he'd hired 6 months prior without telling me. He was inquiring about offshore accounts, about how to liquidate assets without triggering a review, about the legality of transferring funds from a joint marital account into a private one. He was asking for a roadmap to my ruin. Reading those emails, my jaw ached from clenching. It wasn't anger. It was the cold, hard realization that this was premeditated. This was a plan. My hurt began to transform. The question in my head shifted from, why is he doing this to me, to a far more empowering one. How did I let him? I wasn't just angry at him. I was mourning the version of myself who had trusted so blindly, who had willingly handed over her power for the illusion of a peaceful life. That version of Isabella died in my office at 3 a.m., surrounded by the glow of a computer screen. The next phase was defense. If he was building a war chest, I would build a better one. He had forgotten, or perhaps never fully grasped, my background. Before I was his wife, I was a forensic accountant. I understood money trails. I knew how to make assets disappear and reappear in plain sight. And most importantly, I remembered the corporate structures we had set up years ago, entities he'd never bothered to understand. He just signed where I told him to sign. So I began to move our money. Not illegally, never illegally. I was more meticulous than that. I drafted resolutions, transfer agreements, amendments to our family trust. I would slide a stack of papers in front of him in the morning while he was drinking his coffee and reading the news. "Darling, just some routine paperwork for the accountants," I'd say, my voice light and breezy. "End of quarter stuff. Sign here and here." He never looked up. He'd scribble his familiar arrogant signature on documents that transferred ownership of our vacation home into an LLC only I controlled. He signed away his share of our stock portfolio into a blind trust for which I was the sole, irrevocable beneficiary. He signed a power of attorney that gave me sweeping control over our primary investment accounts. Each signature was a nail in the coffin of the future he was planning with Chloe. I felt a strange, detached pity as I watched him do it. He was so confident in his own deception that he couldn't imagine I was capable of my own. While I worked in silence, he became more brazen. He was basking in the stolen glory of a life he thought was just around the corner. I remember one evening, about 6 months into my project, he came home buzzing with excitement. He'd just put a down payment on a boat. "A surprise for us, darling," he'd said, kissing me on the forehead. "For our retirement. We deserve it." The hypocrisy was staggering. I knew from a stray credit card statement that the boat was being registered in his name alone. I also knew the down payment had come from an account he thought I couldn't see. I smiled and said, "How wonderful." That night, I rerouted a dividend payment twice the value of the boat into one of my new holding companies. He didn't even notice it was missing. The final piece, the smoking gun, was the house. Our beautiful home, the one we had raised our children in, the one constant in our lives. I discovered through a misdirected email from a real estate agent that he had it appraised, preparing to use it as collateral for a business loan for Chloe's fledgling interior design company. He was going to leverage our shared past to fund their shared future. That was the line. I spent a week with our lawyer, a man who had known my father and who looked at me with sad, knowing eyes. We drafted the final document, an irrefutable spousal transfer agreement citing tax planning and asset protection. It was complex, layered with legal jargon, but at its heart, it was simple. It transferred sole ownership of our primary residence to me. I presented it to Marcus on a Tuesday morning. It was the last page in a thick stack of other, more mundane documents. My heart wasn't pounding. My hands weren't shaking. There was only a profound sense of calm. The plan was complete. He picked up his expensive fountain pen, the one I'd given him for our 20th anniversary, and signed his name with a flourish at the bottom of the page. He signed away his home without a second glance. I took the document from him. I remember the feel of the heavy paper, still warm from his hand. I looked at his signature, and for the first time in a year, I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. The armour was forged. The fortress was secure. He could have his affair, his new woman, his boat. They were all just ghosts, funded by phantom money. He had nothing left to take from me. I looked at that final, signed document, and a thought, clear and sharp, surfaced in my mind. It was never about the boat. It was never about the house. It was about the narrative. And I'm here to correct the record. I slid it into the file that would, 2 months later, become the contents of the black envelope, returning to the night of the dinner. The walk from the private room to the restaurant's exit felt like moving through water. The ambient noise of the main dining room, the clinking of glasses, the low murmur of conversation, seemed distant, unreal. My focus was entirely internal. I wasn't fleeing. I was making a strategic retreat. The bomb had been planted. The timer was set. I just had to be clear of the blast zone. As I waited for the valet to bring my car, Marcus stormed out of the restaurant. His face, once smug and triumphant, was now a mask of confusion and rage. He had the black envelope clutched in his hand, his knuckles white. "Isabella! What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice high-pitched and frantic. The smooth, sorrowful man from the toast was gone, replaced by a panicked bully. I turned to face him, my expression unreadable. "I told you," I said calmly. "It's a gift, to commemorate the occasion." "It's divorce papers," he hissed, shaking the envelope as if to exercise it. "You served me with divorce papers. Tonight? At my own wife's birthday party?" The irony was apparently lost on him. "I thought it aligned nicely with your plans," I replied, my voice steady. "You wanted to start your new life. I'm simply helping facilitate the transition." He took a step closer, his face contorted. "You think you can pull this? We'll go to court. My lawyer will tear you apart. You'll get nothing. The prenup expired years ago." He was grasping at straws, at legal knowledge he'd gleaned from television dramas. It was almost pitiable. I allowed myself a small, tight smile. "Actually, it didn't. But that's not what's in the envelope, Marcus. The divorce filing is just the cover letter." He ripped the envelope open, his movements clumsy with rage. The first page was, indeed, a copy of the divorce petition, filed that very morning. But behind it were the other documents, the ones that mattered. He began to read, his eyes scanning the pages with growing horror. I didn't need to see them. I had memorized them. I had written them. I narrated the takedown for him, my voice as calm and procedural as a bank teller explaining a transaction. "First," I began, "you'll see the summary of asset transfers. That's a list of all the holdings, stocks, bonds, investment properties that have been moved out of our joint accounts over the past 12 months. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Moved? What are you talking about? I never approved. You did, I interrupted gently. Your signature is on every single transfer authorization. You'll find copies of those attached. Appendix A. He fumbled through the pages, his breathing growing ragged. He saw his own signature, over and over, on documents he had never read. The colour began to drain from his face. Next, I continued, my voice relentless, is the updated title for the Savannah Vacation Home, now held by the IR Holdings Group. That's my holding group. You signed the transfer deed 3 months ago. You thought it was a homeowner's insurance update. He leaned against one of the marble pillars outside the restaurant, the papers trembling in his hand. The house. Our house. Ah, yes. The house, I said, delivering the final blow. That's Appendix C, the spousal transfer agreement. Sole ownership was legally transferred to me on Tuesday, September 12th. You signed it yourself. You thought it was a refinancing application. Our home is mine, Marcus. Free and clear. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. He was a fish pulled from the water, drowning in the open air of the truth. He had been so focused on his own grand deception that he never once considered that I was capable of the same, only my version was smarter, quieter, and legally sound. You can't do this, he finally whispered, the words a hollow echo of his earlier bravado. I didn't do anything, I said, the truth of it ringing with the clarity of a bell. You did. You signed every page. You authorized every transfer. You dismantled our life together with your own pen. The valet pulled my car up to the curb, the engine a soft purr. I held out my hand for the keys. You can have your new life, Marcus, I said, my voice softening not with pity, but with the profound finality of closure. You can have Chloe. You can even have the boat. But you will fund it with what's left in your personal checking account, because everything else, everything we built together over 21 years, is mine. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to cry. The receipts spoke for me. The black ink of his own signature was my witness and my vengeance. I got into my car. As I pulled away from the curb, I looked in the rearview mirror. He was still standing there, a silhouette against the warm glow of the restaurant, the white pages scattered at his feet like fallen leaves. The room he had left behind was shattered. The party was over, and the narrative he had tried so desperately to control had been stolen from him. I left him in the silent, gaping ruin he had created for himself, and I drove away into the night, not looking back. The days that followed the dinner were quiet. It was a strange, hollow quiet, filled with the echoes of the explosion. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear, as if I had just walked out of a burning building and was taking my first breath of clean, cool air. The victory wasn't in the confrontation. It was in the profound, irreversible peace that began to settle in my bones. My phone buzzed constantly for the first 48 hours. The group was splintering. There were the frantic, gossipy calls from friends who wanted a play-by-play, a salacious retelling of Marcus's downfall. I didn't answer. Their currency was drama, and my account was closed. Then there were the awkward, stammering messages from those who felt guilty. They'd leave voicemails starting with, "Isabella, I had no idea." But they did have an idea. They just chose ignorance because it was easier than loyalty. The most significant call came a week later. It was Sophia. Her voice was thin, stripped of its usual confident cadence. "Can I buy you a coffee?" she asked. We met at a small cafe, a neutral ground far from our usual haunts. She couldn't meet my eyes at first. She just stirred her cappuccino, watching the foam dissolve. "I'm so sorry, Isabella," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm a coward." This was the enabler's confession. It wasn't a scene of easy forgiveness. It was a pained, difficult admission. "I saw him with her," she admitted, finally looking at me. Her eyes were filled with a shame that was all her own. "Months ago," At a gallery opening. They were intimate. I should have told you. I should have done something. But I didn't want to be the one to break things. I told myself it was none of my business. Listened, impassive, observational. I didn't offer absolution. I didn't say, it's okay, because it wasn't. Her silence had been a choice. It was your business, Sophia, I said, my voice gentle but firm. I was your friend, and I was in the dark. Tears welled in her eyes. I know. And I will have to live with that. I want you to know that I see you now. I see what he did, and I see what you did. And my God, Isabella, you are magnificent. That was the first small, meaningful alignment. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a recognition of the truth. A quiet apology for her silence. Other gestures followed. An email from an old business associate of Marcus's saying simply, "Heard you're branching out on your own. If you need any introductions, let me know. I always thought you were the brains of the operation." A bottle of expensive champagne left on my doorstep from a couple in our social circle with a simple note, "To new foundations." These were the quiet nods of support, the muttered apologies from people who were now looking at the last 21 years through a new lens. The climax of the fallout, the final echo of the truth, came about a month after the dinner. I was in my lawyer's office signing the last of the paperwork. My lawyer, a kind elderly man named Arthur, cleared his throat. "I heard from Marcus's attorney this morning," he said, not looking up from his papers. "He's not contesting the settlement. He can't. There's nothing to contest." He paused. "I also heard through the grapevine that his new business partner, Miss Chloe, has withdrawn her investment." "You mean he couldn't secure the loan he promised her because the collateral, my house, was no longer available?" I asked, my voice flat. Arthur allowed himself a wry smile. "Precisely. Apparently his financial situation was not what she was led to believe. She's moved on. A real estate developer from Savannah, I believe." I felt nothing. No surge of victory, no petty satisfaction. Just a quiet, somber validation. It was a predictable, logical outcome. Chloe hadn't loved Marcus. She'd loved the lifestyle he promised her. When the lifestyle vanished, so did she. The grand romantic narrative he had tried to sell at my birthday dinner was a house of cards, and I had simply removed the foundation. That was the moment I knew it was truly over. His betrayal no longer had the power to hurt me. His life was now a story being told by other people, and I was no longer a character in it. I signed the last document, the crisp scratch of my pen the only sound in the quiet room. I walked out of that office and into the rest of my life, leaving all the ghosts behind me. The peace was no longer a hope. It was a reality. 6 months later, the world smelled different. It smelled like opportunity. It smelled like the crisp, clean scent of bolts of silk in my new design studio and the rich, dark aroma of coffee brewing at the headquarters of my new foundation. I had taken the assets I had reclaimed and invested them not in revenge, but in reinvention. My home felt different too. I had purged every trace of Marcus. His heavy, ornate furniture was gone, replaced by clean lines and bright, open spaces. His clothes, which had sat in the guest room for weeks until he'd sullenly collected them, were a distant memory. The house was no longer a shared history. It was my canvas. One afternoon, while cleaning out the back of my closet, I found a small, forgotten box. Inside was a collection of my old sketchbooks from before I was married, filled with fashion designs I'd drawn in my 20s. On the first page, in my father's familiar handwriting, was a note from years ago. "Whatever you build, Isabella, make sure it's something you're proud to put your own name on." It was a memento from a past I had forgotten, and it felt like a directive for my future. That became my mission. I launched 2 ventures. The first was a high-end fashion line, Isabella Rossi, built from the sketches I had abandoned 2 decades earlier. The second, and more important, was the New Foundations Guild, my NGO, dedicated to providing financial literacy and legal support for women navigating major life transitions, divorce, widowhood, career changes. I was taking the weapons I had used to save myself and sharing them with others. My true legacy wasn't in the money I had kept, but in the power I was now giving away. The climax of my new life wasn't a confrontation, it was a conversation. A young woman named Maya, one of the first recipients of a grant from my guild, came to my office. She was a brilliant graphic designer whose husband had left her, convincing her she had no claim to the business they had built together. We had provided her with the legal counsel to fight back and win. She sat across from me, her eyes shining with a newfound confidence. "I just wanted to thank you, Isabella," she said. "You didn't just give me a lawyer. You gave me a blueprint. You made me realize I wasn't helpless." In her, I saw a reflection of the woman I had been, scared, silenced, and on the verge of being erased. Helping her felt more satisfying than any victory over Marcus. "You were never helpless, Maya," I told her. "You just needed a map to find your own strength." That evening, I hosted a small gathering at my studio. It wasn't a party. It was the establishment of my new table. Maya was there alongside Sophia, who was now a devoted volunteer at the guild. Arthur, my lawyer, was there, beaming with paternal pride. A few other women who had supported me without question were there. It was a small group, their conversation a warm, authentic hum that filled the space. There was no pretense, no performance. We were simply a collection of people who had earned a seat at the table. There was one final, quiet piece of closure. A few weeks later, I received a letter. It was from Marcus. Not angry, not demanding. It was short and the handwriting was unsteady. It was the letter of a defeated man. "I hope you find happiness, Isabella," it read. "You were right. I built nothing. You built everything. I see that now." I read it once, then folded it and put it away. I didn't feel anger or pity or even satisfaction. I felt nothing at all. He no longer had any power over me, not even the power to make me feel. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't something you give to someone else. It's the peace you claim for yourself when they no longer occupy any space in your mind. The final scene of this story isn't dramatic. It's me, alone in my studio late one night. The city lights glitter outside my window. The scent of silk and coffee hangs in the air. I'm looking at a design I'm working on, a dress that is unapologetically bold and beautiful. I think about the last 21 years, not as a waste, but as a long, difficult education. I learned about loyalty, about betrayal, and about the quiet, indomitable strength of a woman who has been pushed too far. I survived. More than that, I thrived. I built a new world from the ashes of the old one, a world I am proud to put my name on. I pick up my pen and sign my name at the bottom of the sketch, my hand steady and sure. And I know, with a certainty that fills every part of me, that this seat, at this table, in this life, it was never given. I built it.